I thought it was interesting that correspondent talking about the Israeli defense, referring to it as the defense establishment when they just carried out an unprovoked unilateral strike on Iran, that they were preparing for months, if not years, together with the United States, which facilitated it from start to finish, planned it together with them, and made all of this possible. And I was just reading ABC News admitting that U.S. President Trump said they knew the date this was going to happen. U.S. officials said they provided the intelligence. Intelligence only the U.S. has the capability of obtaining and providing because of their assets based in space. Israel does not have a network like that in orbit over planet Earth. So this was a U.S. strike laundered through the Israelis. You're right. When these types of conflicts are ongoing, people have to be patient. They have to wait. It's very tempting to want to jump to conclusions one way or the other, but we have to just be patient and wait. Everything will emerge. Everything will be verified one way or the other. But what we see Iran doing is responding to this Israeli attack on Iran in a larger scale version of the other two retaliations they launched against Israel, again, after Israel struck their consulate in Syria and then struck Iran itself following Iran's first retaliation. So it's a much larger operation. We've heard about the vaunted Iron Dome system, and Israel has a layered air and missile defense network. It's integrated. The United States is operating in coordination with Israel. That was also in the ABC News article, to shoot down as many of these missiles as possible. We could see THAAD being used to intercept incoming Iranian ballistic missiles must be near orbit, because you could see the plume. This is because the air pressure that at altitudes that high is so low that it doesn't act like a normal explosion we're accustomed to seeing during combat at sea level. The problem is Israel has a finite amount of air defense for any incoming attack. Iran knows this. They send a specific number of missiles to first saturate Israeli air defenses, ensuring that at least some of the missiles get through. These are precision-guided weapons. They are launched from Iranian territory, and they strike targets in Israel precisely. So that report you just showed, Danny, that is what they're calling the Israeli Pentagon. Notice how it's right in the middle of a dense urban population center. Why would you put it there? Why would you do that? And then accuse Iran of striking at a population center. You put your military targets there in the middle of the civilian population. And before we started recording, you said that this is exactly like what Ukraine does. And I have to remind people, Israel is the original Ukraine. They are the original proxy built up to fight America's proxy wars abroad, wars the U.S. doesn't want to fight directly. We don't know how many missiles Iran has. We don't know if their missile production facilities were affected by this Israeli strike, or perhaps subsequent strikes may affect it. So we don't know how many missiles they have. Israel has finite air defense capabilities. We could already see the Western world's air defense capabilities are vastly overstretched and dwindling. They don't have the ability to ramp up production. And Israel, on the other hand, their attacks on Iran are much more complicated because they're using aircraft. They have to fly large sorties. They have to coordinate it with electronic warfare. They have to worry about air defenses. They're flying over other nations' airspaces. They're flying into Iranian airspace to do all of this. So it's much more complicated. It will be much more difficult for them to sustain if they have the munitions and everything else required to sustain it.
There are reports that Iran shot down a second F-35. So it's two, and that would mean the F-35 has been down for the first time in its history of use, which is, I guess, historic in a way. We also have reports coming out of a new wave of missiles, and Israeli media itself is admitting that in the Rishon LeZion area, which holds a lot of military infrastructure for Israel, including that compound, the Kiryat compound. Israeli media reported that the destruction in this district has been unprecedented, and said that in this area alone, there was a single death, but 40 injured. And so what I think what we're seeing, Brian, and I want your take on this, is that we had Operation True Promise 3 launched, and now we are witnessing that, yes, we don't know how many missiles Iran has, but they have a significant amount. And if they're saying that they're going to continue for as long as it takes, then it seems like Israel has stepped into something, with the United States as, of course, backing, support, and likely encouragement, even though Israel doesn't need any reason to want to regime change Iran. But both of them are encouraging each other to do this. This is already turning out to be what seems like a big quagmire, a problem. And of course, with promises to burn Tehran, we see Israel and the United States resorting to their same tactics, which is, well, if you can't beat them militarily, especially in any rapid fashion, well, let's target civilians. That's what Israel is promising. And we know if Israel is promising it, the U.S. is promising it.
A lot of interesting points there, Danny. Well, if Israel is a proxy like Ukraine, the U.S. is more than happy to volunteer them for a war. They could possibly suffer catastrophic losses and destroy their economy, devastate their population. The U.S. doesn't care. That is the whole purpose of having proxies, to get other people to fight and die for your wars. That's what they have Ukraine doing right now for 3 years straight. And this is what they have now elected Israel to go do. And that is what Israel is doing right now. But, I always have people arguing with me that Israel controls the United States. If that were the case, the U.S. would have initiated the attack. They would be taking responsibility for it, and they would be the ones catching ballistic missiles, not the Israelis in their de facto capital, Tel Aviv. The thing people have to understand is both Iran and Israel, they're carrying out these long-range strikes on each other. If you look at a map, they are not adjacent to one another. They don't really have the ability to organize ground forces and move in. And there's only so much you can do with these long-range strikes. Look at Russia. Russia has fired thousands of missiles and drones into Ukraine. They also have a massive army in Ukraine, and they have still been unable to completely break down Ukrainian defenses, overwhelm them, and collapse the government in Kiev. Just for example. So what can Israel and Iran realistically achieve through these strikes? Now, Iran is not doing this just to get revenge because they're angry. This is a very calculated, measured response. Yes, it is large, but it is proportional to what Israel did to them. What they want to do is raise the cost for Israel, and then if the U.S. gets involved directly, they're already involved. They need to raise the cost for them so that the longer this goes on, the more costly it is. Iran can see the big picture. It is not just the U.S. fighting and Israel fighting Iran in the Middle East. This is about Russia, China, Iran, and the multipolar world. If they expend too much time and resources and munitions and manpower in this war against Iran or the proxy war in Ukraine, their ability to contain and stop the inevitable and irreversible rise of China, that will be gone. They will never get it back. There's a window of opportunity closing. And this is what has prompted the U.S. to do this in the first place. This was dangerously desperate, extremely reckless.
Yes.
The outcome, unpredictable. But they did it anyway. We've been warning about this. I know we've talked about this many times, Danny, that the U.S. is running out of time and they're getting dangerous and desperate, and they were going to do things like this. They're going to try to provoke a war with China over their island province of Taiwan. They are going to continuously escalate the conflict in Ukraine against Russia. So this is what we have to keep a very close eye on this and watch it all very carefully as it unfolds.
If we are going to see Iranian missiles several days, if we're going to see Operation True Promise last several days, several weeks even, then that level of attrition, I think, is going to be very problematic for both the United States and Israel, because you just laid out the geographic situation Iran has obviously been preparing for this. That's why they rely on their long-range weapon systems. That's why they've been building these missile cities and all of this for years, if not decades. And so Iran is prepared for this war of self-defense, while Israel and the United States are going to have to find a war of attrition, of offense, in a very precarious geographic position. And Iran has, of course, already promised that U.S. assets are also targets should the United States get more involved. I wanted your reaction to this, but also I wanted your reaction to this quote from Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Sergei Ryabkov. He said this, Brian. This is a very interesting statement. He said, no matter how much Israel tries to present it now that it is an irreparable damage and harm, and that their goals have been achieved and so on, they will end up in a worse security situation than before this action. I don't want to anticipate anything, but the determination of the Iranian side speaks for itself.
Yes, I completely agree with that. And isn't that what the United States has done to itself in Europe with Ukraine and now the rest of Europe, the way they have completely destroyed the entire region in this senseless proxy war they're waging with Russia and losing, as far as we can see, they are losing it. And isn't this what they are doing in the Asia Pacific region? They're provoking this war with China. They're trying to encircle and contain them. And they're losing credibility. They're wasting huge amounts of resources they should be spending at home on the actual American people, the people they're charged with taking care of. And so I agree with that completely. I wanted to circle back around to other things that you were saying, Danny, about the F-35s. If that's true, I have not seen confirmation of this, but if it is true, if 2 F-35s were shot down, that confirms suspicions that we've had for years, the US and Israel, with the F-22 and F-35, supposedly at least partially stealth aircraft. They were carrying out standoff strikes against Syria because they were worried that the integrated air defense system in Syria was capable of finding and possibly shooting them down. So they were carrying out standoff strikes that you could carry out with any aircraft. You don't need these trillion-dollar weapon programs to make aircraft that can fire standoff weapons. So that would be another major sign of America's military domination dissipating and evaporating. You were talking about the Iranian nuclear program, and even Western media reports claiming that perhaps not as much damage has been done to it as Israel's trying to claim. If you read the policy papers all the way back from 2009, the Brookings Institution, Which Path to Persia, they said this would happen. If you try to carry out a strike to wipe it out, you would have to carry out such a massive and sustained campaign against Iran to eliminate the nuclear program through airstrikes. You would definitely need U.S. participation. Israel is simply not capable of carrying it out on their own. And I don't think anything has changed since that was written back in 2009. Iran knew this attack was coming. I knew it was coming. I'm just a guy with an internet connection here in Southeast Asia. Iran certainly knew it was going to happen. As you say, they have their missile cities. They've built facilities underground. They almost certainly spread everything out and have, you would think they would have redundancies upon redundancies to ensure that whatever they feel is necessary would survive any type of strike Israel carried out. So all of these factors add up to, like you say, a very, very difficult situation for the U.S. and its proxies. Their goal of essentially overthrowing the government, whether they can install a client regime in its place or not, they don't care. They want to destroy the Iranian government, its economy, its military, remove it from the global stage where they're trying to isolate and contain Russia and China even further. So they're fighting an uphill battle. All Iran has to do, all the government there has to do is survive. And I think that's what is going to guide their decisions in the coming days and possibly weeks, however long this takes.
The narrative war, the public relations war, you call it the propaganda war. And of course, this war often is viewed as one-sided because the United States and Israel, as its proxy, as its military outpost, the West, the combined West, because they have a monopoly on the media. It's often believed that the propaganda war always is in their favor. But here, if this attrition, just like the same with Ukraine, if this war of attrition continues and Iran is successful in not only in surviving and showing off that it has been prepared for this kind of conflict, and right now, if we are just we're speaking the middle of June, in the first few days of this, we can say yes, this is the case. And I think many people in the region, we're seeing videos of people cheering. People are very much, and I think this has been the case for the last couple of years, very much more sympathetic toward Iran in this area, that the public opinion is moving, especially regionally, in their favor. And of course, the United States and Israel, they are seeing their credibility completely and utterly just be destroyed, because on the one hand, they say they're going to do something. For example, they're going to topple Russia, they're going to topple Iran. They don't do it. They get into these wars of attrition. They get into these disastrous public relations, back and forth fights, claiming they're the dominant ones. And then we see perhaps that it's a bit more challenging than they assumed. And then, of course, there's the fact that they target civilians. They kill ordinary people. They kill people who are not combatants. And of course, we've seen this in Gaza. We've seen this all across the region. And now we're seeing it in Iran. And now Israel, of course, speaking also with the United States, is saying they're going to do the same to Tehran. So this is only going to continue to erode the credibility of the empire, no?
Absolutely. And again, I hate to keep going back to it, but the Brookings paper, all the way back from 2009, their biggest fear was that Iran would see through this trap, not jump into it, play their cards well to appear as they actually are, the victim of Western military aggression, unwarranted, unjustified, unprovoked aggression. And the whole world is looking at Iran right now and saying, Israel and the US started this. The US's own intelligence reports were saying Iran is not anywhere close to achieving a nuclear weapon. They're not trying to. They don't want to. They want to negotiate. They were showing up to the negotiations, no matter how many people said that was in bad judgment, because the U.S. obviously wasn't negotiating in good faith. And now in retrospect, it's obvious that they weren't. So they played this very well. This is a very difficult step that they have to go through. But now, what if they were to try to pursue nuclear weapons 5 or 10 years ago? Everyone would say, yes, Iran is the problem. Look at them. The U.S. said that's what they're doing, and that's what they're doing. Now the U.S. and Israel have attacked when it's clear they didn't have these weapons. And now what if they decide we don't want to be part of this non-proliferation treaty? It's not benefiting us in any shape, form, or way. We never wanted nuclear weapons. You're forcing us to obtain them because of your actions against us. You flew across the entire region to bomb us. The U.S. is on the other side of the planet to get involved with this and enable Israel to carry out these threats. So like you say, this narrative, the narrative war, people in the West are always going to side with their own governments. There's a percentage that will always side with their own governments, especially because it's Iran and there's this huge lingering element of racism and Islamophobia there, and just the propaganda that Americans have been basting in for decades now. But the rest of the world is going to start to say to themselves, not only is the U.S. being unreasonable, but the U.S. is dangerous. And if they've done this to Iran, they can do it to us next. And this is a real problem. We have to rethink our plan to be patient and just wait this out. Maybe we have to become a little more proactive about containing the threat the U.S. and its proxies pose to peace, stability, and prosperity for absolutely everyone on earth, including Americans back in the United States.
The United States, of course, has committed itself to supposedly defending Israel. They've sent just an incredible number of their destroyers. Essentially, what it looks like is the United States is going all in militarily, which has implications, I think. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about what those implications might be.
As I've been warning for years, this is about a division of labor. The U.S. dumped their proxy war with Russia in Ukraine on Europe. They're preparing a major pivot to Asia, and they always wanted to just completely finish destroying the Middle East before they did that, because the hydrocarbons are coming from the Middle East going to China, fueling its economic rise. This was always a prerequisite for the pivot they now need to make towards Asia. They have rearranged their entire global military posture in preparation for this. So anyone who thinks that the U.S. didn't organize this and didn't know that it was happening, they were pre-positioning their air defense, missile defense systems, troops. They were rearranging all of their illegal bases scattered across the region. They were reorganizing all of this ahead of this provocation they had planned. It was always the plan to have Israel provoke it, take the blame for full responsibility for starting the war. The U.S. was always, read the policy papers, the U.S. was always going to join in and make it as if they were sucked into the war when it is their war to begin with. That was always the plan. So this is a narrative game the United States is playing, obviously, clearly. Again, if they didn't want this war, all they had to do is withhold all of the capabilities that they provided Israel that made this possible. If they did not have these capabilities, they would not have been able to carry it out. It would have been impossible for them to carry it out. So now here we are. And the one thing that I would warn about, it is a real danger, even if people don't want to think that it is. Israel has nuclear weapons. The U.S. has used their Israeli proxy, transformed it into the villain. Everyone hates Israel. You know, the public opinion is plummeting around the world. Nobody likes Israel. They have made themselves out to be the villain. Nothing they do will shock anybody. If they were to use nuclear weapons on Iran, say to target Tehran or to heavily devastate its infrastructure, would anybody be surprised? And what would anyone do in response to it? And the U.S. could just say, well, we told them not to, but they did it anyway. That's all they have to say. And what would anyone be able to do about that? But we are moving into uncharted waters here. This is incredibly dangerous. This is a massive provocation. Again, under President Trump, the peace president. Everyone just please keep that in mind. He was always going to do this. He posed as being a peace president to lull people into complacency, lull people into a false sense of security, and to create plausible deniability between themselves and Israel. So we have to be very, very, very careful moving forward. This was always meant to escalate out of control.